Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Say. This is Rabbi Yehuda Levin. The program is the Fear Kashas, where we ask the questions of the sphere to ask and give the answers according to the hashkaf of the Gedolei Yisrael of yesteryear. I am your humble host, Yehuda Levin. And although you may be listening to this in one of three venues, either on our hotline 212-461-2852 Koyach Ben, or on the radio at 6:20 a.m. between midnight and 1 o'clock Monday morning, that's Sunday night, Monday morning, on Talkline Communications Network, or you may be seeing this on the video on the Fear, F-E-A-R, Kashes, Kashes.com. Tonight, you know, there are certain times I have distinguished guests, so instead of starting with a Dvar Torah, we instead accommodate the guest, and we're starting with a guest. And I have sitting with me here a person who's very well recognized. Anybody who has ever seen even the back of the red yarmulke. There was one time he was on Bob Grant, and I think he had the red yarmulke. He was by a telephone booth reporting during the Crown Hats Rise. And then we heard him getting mugged on the Bob Grant radio. He's a very famous personality who carries on the famous legacy of the Hecht family. His father, the sainted Askin, Rav J.J. Hecht, Rav Yaakov Yehuda Hecht, Zechron Levrocha. And I'm joined in Bod L'Chaim with Reb Shia Hecht, who has been leading the National Conference, Council for the
National Committee for the Furtherance of
Jewish Education. And, you know, I didn't fully realize the heck of, I know he has camps, and I know he does moedic stuff, giving out food to Pesach and all year round, and I think he has something with Hadar Torah or something, and he sends kids to school, he does Shabbatons and everything else. It's mamish gewalt. But in addition to that, I found out, and I'll tell you the truth, this is being taped the week before the Sunday night. That means this is being played Sunday night after Yom Kippur, but it's being taped 2 days before Yom Kippur, Wednesday night. And I want you to know we're into the tshuva mode, and we're into saying, Boishti v'nechlamti, ich mamish shem zich from the Yid, because as much as I might have one or two disagreements with him on the role of politicians and politics and how much we can support them, but I'm telling you, I can say, Adis, that what he's doing for the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael, he's doing more than all these organizations, because they're not doing what he's doing. Not the Satma, not Aguda, not the OU. They're not doing it. And what brings us together is this morning, I was called, maybe even through Rabbi Hecht, to come down to the court at J Street, because a person in our community in the heart of Flatbush, a 26-year-old named Andrew Goodman, was arraigned and remanded on $1 million bail. Now you have to be quite a knacker in a time where rapists and lowlifes get out after a few years. For a judge to assess $1 million bail, you got to really be a gewaldige bal avera, to put it mildly. Andrew Goodman has been being mefata, seducing young men of the Fruma Orthodox community since he's 12 years old. He's now 26. And he's been doing it Beresh Galei in the heart of Flatbush. And not only that, the parents in the block and the surrounding blocks and areas, many of them felt powerless to do anything. And he had a friend with a gun, and the guy showed the gun to people, and they were afraid that maybe they would get shot. And then you know that people are just afraid. They don't want to acknowledge that their kid might be oised in such a thing. So it can shot in Shem Shidduch, and it can't be my kid, and everything else. And the person who put in Herculean efforts in this issue is none other than Reb Shia Hecht. I'm thrilled that he found the time of Yontif to come down. We're making this, hopefully that this should be seen by thousands of people, not only locally in Brooklyn, but across the globe, to have an understanding up front of how a molestation case works. And before I'm going to hand over now the microphone to Rabbi Hecht to tell us what he has to tell us, but he pointed out there's a great difference between hearing that a counselor in a camp or a rebbe in a yeshiva chas v'sholem is molesting a boy. That's one bechina. This is somebody who goes out as a very diseased individual who goes out hunting. He goes. In the homosexual community, it's even called chicken hawks. There's the hawk and the chicken. They go out to places and they know how to talk, and they know how to bribe the children, the youth, with using cars, with prizes, with friendship, with self-esteem, with drug cocktails, with alcohol, until they get the kid, until they build him up. And who knows how many children this molester has taken advantage of, and what he's triggered, and who knows how much he would. and Rabbi Shia Hecht and a small group of people who he works with have been responsible for the fact that for the second time in a matter of months, he stood before a judge, but this time, unlike last time, where a foolish Haredi Talmud Chacham said, we have to rata for him, and went and paid the money to get him out so that he can now malastrate, as they say on Satma, more kids, which he did over the last few months. This time, he's on $1 million bail, and we want to say, Yisham Alachem, nobody should help him. It's us to help him. Rabbi Hecht, what can you tell us about this situation?
Well, first of all, let me say Gemar Tov, although the listeners are going to listen. I think I was going to say, Pisketava come in the Chiyazog, Till Shana Rabba, we have an opportunity before Hashem to, I call it's an appeal process that we can do to Hashem, that even if Chas v'Shalom we did not get signed and sealed in the way that we want it, we can appeal our case and ask God to still give us tremendous brachas. And we do this through Simcha, through the coming Yontif of Sukkot. By us bringing Simcha upon ourselves and our families, we bring upon ourselves tremendous bracha. It came to our attention, and I want to say that I wish I could take all the credit, but I cannot take all the credit. The family who were choshed that their son was a victim by this fellow, Andrew Goodman, came forward to Rabbanim, and they realized that what had to be done was simply to take action from all sides. Let me say it that way. The Pearl, 3 different victims came forward to speak to the police. What I understand, it's about 20-some odd charges against him, what they call different charges, different laws, how they count these things, I'm not exactly sure. But one thing is for sure. I spoke to one of these victims who told me the most horrifying things. If it was my son, I tell you, it wasn't my son, I was not able to sleep. When you hear a young, sweet, naive, pure neshama, a young man who was learning in yeshiva, who was molested time and time again, and the mode of operation of this fellow was simply that he gave them alcohol, and sometimes he would give the kids drugs. He would invite them to their homes to watch videos. It's not the videos that others would speak about even, and he would that way expose them to a tremendous amount of really destructive pornography, straightforward pornography. Right. And then, of course, to molest these young people. And it was interesting. Some of these victims, or at least the victim told us, of how he would, in fact, ask the victim to help him bring other victims. This young man, one of the things I brought out today in court was that he went to a yeshiva in Borough Park. He hung around the yeshiva, looking and staking out for his victims. When it came forward and spoke to children and went over to them and got them involved in a conversation and tried to lure them in if they would in fact exchange favors or be a victim, plain and simple. I'm not exactly sure. I'm trying to say it in a rabbi with ICS Nakia and to really say it in a proper way. But it is really Shema Shemayim what took place. He came one day to the yeshiva and did the following. He said, I lost a pair of glasses. And the young man that will find my glasses, I'm going to give a reward. And in that way, he starts a relationship, plants it somewhere in the schoolyard, where the kids were playing. And in that way, he has a relationship with this one child and then continues to try to continue that relationship. He also, unfortunately, goes to places where there are other kids of troubled kids, and we know that there are Rabbanim and Askanim within our community who are trying to help these children, what we call at-risk kids and high-risk kids. He goes to these places and offers help. And, for instance, one of the parents told us that my son came forward and told me that this kid, he was helping him in homework. He was very, very nice. Now, if you have a 15, 14-year-old son in the 9th grade or 10th grade and struggling in school, and you now have someone who comes along and says, I'm not going to charge you. I'm going to give it you free of charge to help your child with homework. It's something that every parent would grab, would be so happy. But But Rahman al-Islam, when you find out that the reason for this is because he's simply preying on your child and using and hopefully waiting for the opportunity when he can make a move and then actually molest that child. It was very, very interesting. A second victim told us that he also had a design of telling and getting these kids to hate their parents. So he was getting these kids to turn on their family, to turn on their parents, to turn on Yiddishkeit and Torah Yiddishkeit. Of course, once you are a victim, you feel very, very ichi by yourself. You don't feel proud, and therefore you don't feel that you can go to shul. You don't feel that you can, of course, go to a mikveh before a yontif. You don't feel that you belong in society. You feel odd, and in that way, you really separate yourself from the community. And that way, the molester has even a greater hold on the victim. Rahman al-Islam, what really made the change from the original, a very, very low bail to a high bail, they were, it seems that someone on the block actually videotaped during this time after his arrest and before the trial, he actually videotaped many, many children going into the home of this molester, and always took place somewhere between 12 at night and 5 o'clock in the morning. Meaning to say, these kids would go home, they would go to sleep, they would wake up in the middle of the night, sneak out of the house, go to this guy's house, and you watch the kids. I mean, I've seen the film. When you watch these kids, how they look back and forwards to the camera to see who's watching me, who may be seeing me if I'm going in, and if it's safe for me to go into the house. These kids would spend there an hour or two. Remember, today, everything is recordable. You can put, a timer on the computer. You have a way of videotaping what took place, which is, by the way, a Musar Haskell in general that we should know, that there is an eye that sees and an ear that hears everything that we do. We have to learn from the computer that Hashem has everything, and a little chip can have all our history, everything what we do. But this is the way he would prey on these kids. We were told that he would instruct these kids if police came to talk to you. He gave these kids what to answer and how to answer. And if he would told them this, so let's say he would take these kids out to restaurants. He would take these kids out to movies. He would take these kids out to town, to Manhattan. And he then, too, would tell them, if somebody stops us, tell them we're cousins. Tell them we're related. And in that way, they will not be suspicious of what's going on. So what hurts me so much is that it was a planned out. He would look for his victim, he would prey on that victim, then make the move on that victim, and eventually was successful. Rahman al-Islam, and we don't know how many victims. And at this moment, if I may, Rabbi Levin, to call out, because this guy, Andrew Goodman, worked in a place called Women's League, and in a place called Ohel. We all know Ohel Children's Home. He ran one of their homes. He worked in their homes over Shabbos or in the evenings. We believe that there's reason to believe that this guy molested people within the home. And we have called upon Women's League and Ohel to do an internal investigation to find out. We're not saying anything happened or these institutions did anything wrong. But Rahman al-Islam, it's very, very possible that there were victims. These are helpless victims to a person who is, demented, Rahman al-Islam, who is sick. Unfortunately, studies show that these guys
there's no help to them.
Yeah. And this goes back 30 years ago.
For years and years.
In Stanford University was one of the first study that's quoted all over the place that shows that these offenders are repeat offenders, and unfortunately, there is no tikkun. You're not thinking to say, we're going to send them to some type. And the rumor out in the street is, by the way, that this young man put himself into one of these clinics, so he'll be able to walk in the court and says, hey, listen, judge, I went for help and I'm cured, and therefore you can let me back on the streets. Anyone that can get arrested, and during that time, before he has his case, could invite other children. And his prey was basically on children from the age of 11 to the age of 16. And then would hurt them, just throw them out, because he had no use for them. the judge brilliantly said today in court that surely you're not, number one, you're not making light of the situation, but you're not going to come into my courtroom and say that an 11 and a 12-year-old gave consent to a molester. Please don't use that. I don't want to hear that excuse in this courtroom. And really had the courage. One of the things, again, why he was able to be turned around to show how sick and demented this person is simply because during the time that the arrest took place, before the court cases have started, he had continuously invited people to his home, made parties, once again, alcohol, drugs, movies. This is his mode of operation. I also want to call out to people, if you know of children that attended some of the places, I don't want to mention them by name, but some of the places within Flatbush that deal with high and at-risk kids, and if you are able to ask them, do you know Andrew Goodman? And find out, were you perhaps a victim? And don't just ask them the question that way. No one's going to say, yes, I was a victim. What you have to do is a little bit more creative. You have to come and say, listen, the important thing is here, you have to save other children. Unfortunately, maybe you are a victim. But one of the victims that we spoke to is so happy, was so happy today. He said, we have to say l'chaim. We have to give a kiddush to what took place today in court. Because at least a perpetrator is put behind bars right now, and therefore he's not going to be able to start up with kids during this time. So, and also, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, we have to be smart. Yes, I'm a Lubavitcher. I'm in the Kira business. I would want to be makar everybody. Any sinner, any perpetrator, I would want to help. But you got to be careful if you put him right back into the community that he's there, where he's friendly, and he's befriending children on the street, and he's going to schoolyards where kids are playing. And I'm talking about yeshiva kids with yarmulkes and black hats and payas. Then we have a very, very big problem, and therefore we have to step forward. So if you know information about this fellow, if you know information about other fellows, you can call my office and give me information. I try to be helpful. There are people within the political world who are very, very helpful, and have been talked about it. And by the way, why they're quiet now? Because people put pressure on them to be quiet. Reach out to your local police department and reach out to the DAs. And many, many times, if it's sometimes a story develops over time. You may not have all the pieces to the puzzle right in the beginning. I urge you that if you have a chash on a particular perpetrator, if you have a chash of your child being a victim, stick with it. Fight it. Go again and again and again to the police. Push them. Go to the DA. Put pressure. Have your Rav of your shul call. Have your, and I know in this case some of these kids, they had other people on the block write letters to the DA and to the judge. Say, listen, we live on this block where this guy has been parading back and forth and been preying on the children. We're asking you, please think about our children when you have to make that decision. What are you going to do about our children? Yes, the perpetrators are mensch, but what about the tens of children that are on the block or in the immediate neighborhood? And we know in the yeshivish world, you're right. One family and have 3-4 children in that age bracket. Rahman al-Islam. And I mean that's a bracha that they have children, but that they be victims.
They were all victims, you're saying?
No, there were families that he preyed on. I believe much more information.
Also, you're saying
I believe that much more information is going to come forward. There are people who are working with the police and working with their children and trying to get it out. It doesn't come out easy because no one wants to be able to say, listen, I was a victim. No matter how much a victim we are, maybe we can't stand up to protect ourselves sometimes. I just heard a story today about a victim of another perpetrator, Zerach Brown, who was also known to be a molester and was thrown out of different communities. And he says this victim works out constantly. He says, I want to become strong and have my muscles, and I want to go back and I want to confront my molester. I want to be able to say, okay, now start up with me. Let's see now what will happen. So we have to understand, and if you have a child that's not the way to go. The way to go is through the police department to put the guy behind bars that he should not be able to molest your child or somebody else's child.
Yeah, Rabbi Hecht, I think you basically covered 90% of the stuff. The reason that I asked you to come is because we're talking about two things now. We're issuing a call for anyone who has the slightest information on Andrew Goodman and children that might have been afflicted by him, and that it's a mitzvah gedolah. I want to tell you that Hashem deals midah keneged midah. So to the person who is molested, one of the biggest tikkunim that he himself should lead a decent life and be able to fully recover is if he's mezaka that other people should not become victims of this person because this person is put away. So it's pashut self-help in a ruchniistic way to come forward on him. And also it's a tremendous chus for the person that he should be able to let later on in life get married and have children, and that they shouldn't be afflicted because he stood up against this Maisa Amalek. In addition to this, the parents have to understand this also. That for the parents also, they have to understand, they have to try to have a gefil fayenims akint, and that should make that their future children, their einaklach, also should have a shmira. So,
and often the best tikkun for your own child who is a victim is when they do see. I know we preach against against revenge, but this is not revenge what we're looking for. We're looking for justice, A, and B, we're looking for a way that your child can move on. Many of these children are not able to move on. A guy like Andrew Goodman, he's into martial arts. He has friends who have, have guns and shooting ranges, and they do things. So they put a fear into these kids that if you go and tell anybody, if you step forward to the police, not directly, but indirectly, hey, you know that we can hurt you, we can harm you. And therefore they put a tremendous fear in them. And knowing that these guys are behind bars will be the only ticket for your child to move on with life. So I urge you and beg you, if you have a child, to speak to your child. If you have information, you can call the DA's office or you can call our office. My number is 718-735-0200. That's 718-735-0200. My name is Shia Hecht. I'll be more than happy to help you out whenever you can. There was many people involved in this case, by the way. Some of those counselors and some of the bachrim that were helping out, they would give up their time at any time if they're able to help you.
Now
and one second, and also with OL and Women's League, if you have any influence, please, let's use the influence to make sure that, first of all, the things can be put in, there can be cameras can be put in, it should be put in. Guys like this, we do not need to take care of our children.
And I want to comment parenthetically that I am aware, and I think there's information on the internet and there's other information, that this is not the first or the second or the third molester who was a counselor in Ohel. And I'm issuing a call to David Medell writes so beautifully and so strongly about abuse. And meanwhile, the Schustergate Barbers, under the roof of Ohel, there has to be tikkunim. And I hope that Rav Cohen and that David Mendel and that Rav Moshe Hellman, I hope they could sit down, and maybe they should even sit down with Rabbi Hecht, but they should sit down with others, experts, and they should make, just like a house Pesach has to be chometz proof, and during the year it has to be bed bug proof and mice proof, it has to be molester proof, and it's time to face this square on. But let me move to the next important reason that I begged Rav Hecht to come out here tonight to speak ponim el ponim v'mizakta. You should see. Many of us, with children, with parents, we have children, and we figure our children are innocent, they're erlich, they grow up without TV, without bad influences. There's no reason we have to speak to them about the sultry, the low inyonim of life. It's not going to happen, my kid. He's in the best Hasidic yeshiva, Litvish yeshiva. This is absolutely not true. There's Einat B'Travos Arayis. You see how these people know how to pray, they know how to initiate, they know how to integrate themselves and assimilate themselves. And therefore, it's a choiv kaddish that people should understand. You must explain to your children, bar none. Every child has to be told, if a person even a frum person comes and he talks nicely and he wants to take you places, he wants to give you things. I'm saying that people today have to have their antenna up. And versteht sich, you teach your kids, you don't go to other people's houses, you don't go off there. There's a Yetzirah, and you have to explain to your kid how not to be touched, and how not to be looked at, and what not to be shown things. This is crucial because through this broadcast, we could perhaps, if parents do it, if 100 parents do it, 50 parents do it, we could save potential victims.
All right, very loving. A while ago, I had a 10-year-old little boy from a Chassidish yeshiva, also a sweet Z-skinned, that he came to talk. His parents brought him to me, and unfortunately was bullied and molested by other kids, same age children. So it's a little bit of a different problem. And at the end, I said to the mother, "So how did you get through to your child?" And this is something I speak to every father and every mother out there. Important to speak to your child and tell your child, you know that you can tell mommy everything. You can tell Tati everything. We are here. We love you. We will take care of you. We will protect you. And of course, one of the things very important to tell our children, if somebody comes and tells you not to tell Tati or not to tell mommy, that is something that we have to know about also. And we will watch over you. We will protect you. And if your child comes and tells you something negative, because sometimes it's within their own mishpacha, don't ever shout at your child. Love your child, hug your child, express more love, and say, "Listen, Shefala, my dear good child, my dear son, my dear daughter, I'm listening to what you're saying. It's a little bit hard. How can I confront a family member? What I can do about it? Give me some time. Let me think about it. But I do believe what you're telling me." The worst thing is when I speak to a victim who says that I was a victim 10 years ago. I came and told my father something. My father gave me a frask and said, I shouldn't talk bad about the Rebbe, or I shouldn't talk bad about the thing. Later, 10 years later, they come back and they say, "Listen, we realize now that our son or daughter was telling us the truth. Please, I beg of you, fathers and mothers, have open communication with your children. Tell your children to come and tell you they can tell you everything. And if they tell you something that's a little bit to the side, off the beaten path, give them more love and embrace them, and you will only show them that you really care about them. And it is very, very important to believe our children. If we expect them to tell the truth, we have to show them that we believe them. And not only believe in them, which is also important, but we believe when they tell us something. It doesn't mean that if somebody comes and says something fakert, that we say our kids that we're not going to act accordingly, or just act on whatever my son or daughter says. But it shows that we're going to take the child seriously, whatever they say.
Yeah, this is extremely important, and I just want to say we're taping this before Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur Mincha time, we read about these kinds of transgressions at the most serious time of the year, the most serious day, the most serious hour, Mincha time. This is what we're reading about, so people should understand these problems were as old as time immemorial. We should also understand that and Amalek, Rashi touches up, Amalek Asher Korcha is mamish this Inyan. We have to understand this is the Muhammad Hashem Amalek. We understand this Ikvis of the Mashiach, and therefore this is the last gasp. I dare say that the prevalence of this now, the way this is coming more and more, and it's being accepted to a certain way politically and in society, all this is having an influence. So we dare not bury our heads in the sand. So GodReignOverUs is, just a recap, we need any and all information on Andrew Goodman. Anybody could step forward. I'm telling you, schorcha harbe ma'od you're going to do for your family, for your community. You're going to be noitel schar keneged kulam, because you can be the person that can help keep this person away from harming other people. It's crucial to get in touch with Rabbi Hecht, to get in touch with D.A. Hines about this. The second thing is use this opportunity as a teaching opportunity. Speak to your children. If you've been avoiding it, do it now. This is a signal min hashamayim. I'm telling you, for months, a radius around this house in the center of Flatbush, the parents are sitted, and they were afraid. They were afraid of threats with the guns, and they were afraid. And it was like people were paralyzed. I heard about this months ago, and people were paralyzed. And now, Baruch Hashem, we have an opportunity that because of people indefatigably, like Rabbi Hecht, who are fighting and pushing, Baruch Hashem, the legal system is taking strong steps. But you should know this should be a chizuk also if there are people out there who are having tsaros with other people. Don't hesitate. You see that things can be done, and a person could be put with a $1 million bail behind bars, and that's what we need. We need to do this more. Ratava your own children and have the schus for Klal Yisrael. I want to thank you, Rabbi Hecht, for coming.
I want to just add one more point. Although this is a little bit of a hot potato, a little bit, because politically, and you know that I'm a person, and like I follow in my father's footsteps, that we should be involved with the politicians, and be good with the politicians, and sometimes even too good to the politician, etc. I appeal to my colleagues who are a little bit involved or liaison to government offices, or balabatim who give money to political fundraisers. Our voice must be heard. I realize that sometimes we have to back the candidate even though he has certain things that we don't believe in. But not to voice these things is foolish on our side and actually going to hurt us. I think we have to voice our opinions and voice our objection. Even as now we're going to make it out there. And I tell you something, I was very close with Mayor Giuliani. I remember the first time I put my father backed him in 1989, and in 92 when he was running, I said to him once, I said, listen, I realize clearly, and I say this to politicians all the time, I realize when I come with you, you're not going to do exactly what I tell you. But I want to know that I'm heard. I want to know that my view is reckoned with. You at least you're making some type of, thought in the whole general process. Well, you're going to make your decision? Okay, listen, you're the elected official, and you're going to make your decision. But to ignore things that are Torah aspects or things that are negated to us, even though we may be a minority in that particular community. Certain communities we're not a minority, we're a majority, and we surely should get our way. But even in the place where we're a minority, that we should be ignored on these things, this is a really Shem Shemayim. That's a crime. So,
I want to thank you, Rabbi Hecht. I want to thank you for coming down here personally, and we hope that this will get wide exposure, and that people will realize that they have to give even closer attention to what their children are doing, who they're associating with, and that they have to have these hard, difficult, uncomfortable conversations with their children. The sooner the better, because you could save people by giving them the imuts, the strength, and the knowledge of how to identify I know a person who speaks Yiddish. He says, Rabbi David Eidenson, years ago, he taught his kids that if they do such and such, if somebody touches you or this or that, as a chazer mensch. And he had one time, his kid said, the kid came around to his father, right, Tati, this is the chazer mensch, was sitting with itself begging them. He knew this is what it is. We have to explain to the kids, these are sick people, and what they do is against the Torah. This thing that we're trying to hide it from them, it's a gewaldige time. Yom Kippur is a time where there's no Satan. Yom Kippur. You tell your kids, we read these things in Chumash. What do we read in the holiest day of the year? And if you look in the list, and I think Rav Avad Yosef speaks about this, the last two things of all the improprieties you hear are Mishkav Zocha, and I think the very last one, if I remember correctly, is Mishkav Behema. I think it could be Rav Avad Yosef. In other words, we have to understand that this is from time immemorial the challenge. This is the challenge. This is the Maisa Amalek. And what it does is Shreklach. And in this chus, we'll find a way to speak to them. We should be Zoicha that our kids should grow up to be pure. The Kedusha, but we should be Zoicha for Gemar Toiv and everything good. Rabbi Hecht, thank you very, very much.